Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the first episode of Sudan In Focus, weekly news magazine, which focuses on Sudan news and events, aiming to give Sudan TV audience a broad and first-hand information about what is going on in Sudan. So let's go.
The chairman of the Sovereign Council, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, stressed that the priorities for a peaceful solution to the Sudanese crisis are to affirm the commitment to the Jeddah Declaration of Humanitarian Principles and the ceasefire, and to remove everything that hinders the provision of humanitarian aid, followed by the launch of a comprehensive political process based on pure national will, to reach a national consensus on the management of the transitional period and the holding of general elections. Al-Burhan said in his speech before the extraordinary summit of IGAD heads of state and government, which was held in Djibouti on Saturday, amid regional and international participation, that the signing of the Jeddah Declaration of Humanitarian Principles was a real and early opportunity to end the Sudanese crisis peacefully, if the rebels committed to what was signed. But it was proven beyond any doubt that the rebellion did not have any political will to stop its war on the state and
as we convene, Your Excellencies, in unity and solidarity, in support of our IGAD family members in the Republic of Sudan, the challenges they are facing demand our collective wisdom, commitment and concrete action.
IGAD Executive Secretary Workna Gabehu said that the Horn of Africa region stands at a critical juncture, as the ongoing conflict in Sudan casts a shadow on aspirations of the region to achieve peace and prosperity in the greater Horn of Africa region.
And it is our moral duty, Your Excellencies, to expedite the implementation of the partial resolution of the Jeddah Agreement, which has been co-facilitated by IGAD under your leadership, Your Excellencies.
That there is no acceptable military solution to the conflict. That there should be no external assistance to the parties.
The U.S. envoy to the Horn of Africa, Ambassador Michael Hammer, called for an immediate ceasefire in Sudan, stressing the impossibility of a military resolution of the war and called for an end to foreign interference in Sudanese affairs. For his part, the personal envoy of the Secretary-General of the United Nations to Sudan, Ramtane Lamamra, said that the top priority should be the complete cessation of hostilities in Sudan to protect lives and deliver humanitarian aid.
Therefore, the immediate priority should be in finalizing a cessation of hostilities which could lead towards lasting peace in the country. A cessation of hostilities will save lives and enhance the protection of civilian population. A cessation of hostilities will facilitate the much needed access to humanitarian assistance for the most vulnerable Sudanese people across the country.
Deputy Chairman of the Transitional Sovereignty Council Malik Akar Air received the recommendations of the Forum of Regional Governors and State Governors, which concluded its work today in Gadaref in the presence of several federal ministers and state governors. The forum recommended intensifying efforts to build and instill the national spirit in the Sudanese people and work to strengthen national unity and the provisions of security coordination between the center and the states, the rule of law, the extension of security, and the achievement of the prestige of the state to prevent smuggling and close the targeted ports and entrances to prevent any infiltration of rebel forces into safe cities and states. Hundreds of Sudanese demonstrated in front of the United Arab Emirates Embassy in London in protest against the United Arab Emirates support for the terrorist Rapid Support Militia, which is waging a genocidal war in Khartoum and West Darfur state. The demonstrators chanted slogans demanding that the UAE leaders stop their blatant interference in Sudanese affairs.
about how the UAE funds are being used to supply the Janjaweed
with weapons to destroy and take over Sudan.
The Sudanese war has a massive impact on the people.
Continuous exposure to violence will have a negative impact on the people's mental health.
More than 12,000 people have died in Sudan. More than 10,000 children have been starved, raped, killed to death.
The Janjaweed has cut electricity, water and all the human needs.
This is what the UAE is helping.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
The official spokesperson of the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, Brigadier General Nabil Abdallah has pointed out in press statement on Friday that SAF is a national professional army with a firm military doctrine. Nabil stressed that the Sudanese army respects international human law and could never commit any war crime. He rejected any comparison between the army and the terrorist militias which also commit ethnic cleanings, to be added to its heinous record in war crimes.
Committee has convened this forum to achieve the following objectives. First, affirming our strict commitment to all...
Head of the National Commission for Peace, Professor Suleiman Aldebello, appreciated the efforts exerted by international and national organizations working in the humanitarian field in light of the circumstances the country is experiencing and the response of donors and the world through international and regional organizations. Aldebello noted in a statement at a briefing forum on humanitarian response operations in the current emergency situation, National Policies and Priorities, which was organized by the Joint National Committee for Humanitarian Emergencies on Thursday in Port Sudan, the great attention that the state accords to facilitating the work and efforts of workers in the humanitarian field. He pointed out this regard to the Sovereign Council's resolution to form the Joint National Committee for Humanitarian Emergencies with the aim of overcoming the obstacles facing the humanitarian field in the country. The U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has expressed concern over the deteriorating security situation in the Sudan. News report said Harris expressed U.S. concerns over Sudan in her discussion with UAE President. The reports pointed out that in a pivotal exchange that transpired in Dubai, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan delved into a host of regional issues, including the escalating crisis in Sudan. The report quoted White House's statement, as saying that Harris voiced the U.S.'s growing concerns over the deteriorating security and humanitarian conditions in the African nation.
I want to turn to a topic that is of grave concern to us all, the military conflict in Sudan.
U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs Molly Fee addressed questions from Congress on the issue and the Biden administration's response to the ongoing conflict in Sudan. A top State Department official said on Tuesday that pressure from Congress on the United Arab Emirates over its alleged support to the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, in Sudan is helpful. The House Foreign Affairs Committee's Subcommittee for Africa held a hearing on U.S. policy options in the Sahel region that spans across the continent below the Sahara Desert. Much of the hearing focused on the ongoing conflict in Sudan. In April, fighting broke out between the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF.
Members of the Joint.
An enlightening forum was held at the Coral Hotel in Port Sudan on humanitarian response operations in the current emergency, policies, mechanisms, and national priorities, which was organized by the Joint National Committee for Humanitarian Emergencies, in the presence of local, regional, and international organizations and United Nations organizations and agencies operating in Sudan, and the participation of many heads of diplomatic missions abroad via video. The chairman of the Joint Committee for Humanitarian Emergencies, Lieutenant General Ibrahim Jaber, confirmed the Sudanese government's full commitment to putting all the proposals and recommendations that came out of the forum into immediate implementation and setting a schedule of meetings between the Sudanese government and all partners in humanitarian work to remove any misunderstanding that may arise. The representative of the chairman of the Joint National Committee for Humanitarian Emergencies, Professor Suleiman Mohammed Aldebello, confirmed in his speech the objectives of the forum.
First, affirming our strict commitment to all laws and governments signed between the government of Sudan, agencies, organizations, and local and whatever agreements. As for the second, provide an opportunity for humanitarian workers to highlight their experience, observation, and difficulty faced during the implementation.
The forum was also addressed by the Federal Minister of Health, Dr. Haytham Mohammed Ibrahim, the Undersecretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Dafala Al-Haj Ali, and the Chairman of the Federal Humanitarian Aid Commission, Dr. Salah Al-Mubarak Yusuf. At the end of the forum, the Minister of Culture and Information, the official government spokesman, Dr. Jairaham Abdelkader, made press statements in which he affirmed the Sudanese government's intention to implement all the recommendations and decisions of the forum.
The forum was addressed by the chairman of the Joint National Humanitarian Emergency Committee, Lieutenant General Ibrahim Jabir, via video conference, stressing the Sudanese government's full commitment to putting all the proposals and recommendations that came out of the forum into immediate implementation, and setting schedule for meetings between the Sudanese government and all partners in humanitarian work to remove any misunderstanding that may arise.
International think tanks are worried that the escalation of fighting in Sudan could jeopardize the security situation in a region full of wars and interconflicts. The U.S. Institute of Peace has previously warned that war in one country in the region has the risk of spilling over and spreading instability through the flow of refugees across borders and widening humanitarian crises, recording that Sudan currently hosts refugees from the Tigray war in the neighboring Ethiopia. Chad and Egypt have already closed their borders with Sudan, indicating that regional leaders believe these clashes could escalate further. In the days ahead, it will be important to pay attention to any fluid alignment and reordering of alliances in the region. Away from the headlines dominated by the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, a civil war in Sudan is pushing the country to the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe. As an allegedly genocidal RSF gains the upper hand, a UN official has warned that Sudan is facing a convergence of a worsening humanitarian calamity and catastrophic human rights crisis. The RSF has been accused of committing genocide, ethnic cleansing, and sexual violence directed at the non-Arab Masalit community. In early November, over a period of 6 days, the RSF has launched an attack on Ardamata, a town just outside El Geneina, resulting in the displacement of the entire town's population. Many believe this is to be ethnic cleansing because the RSF targeted members of the Masalit tribe. Accounts from survivors and witnesses suggest Masalit civilians suffered 6 days of terror at the hands of the RSF and its allied militia after they seized control in Ardamata. The UN estimates more than 9,000 civilians have been killed since the start of the war in April. More than 7 million people have been forced from their homes, making it the world's largest displacement crisis, and 25 million people need humanitarian assistance to survive. For months now, many areas across the country have been under siege with no access to basic needs. Multiple efforts have been launched to try and broker a ceasefire. The United States and Saudi Arabia established the Jeddah Initiative to facilitate a cessation of hostilities and the provision of humanitarian assistance. Both the African Union and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development have put forward roadmaps to sequence peace and political talks. Frontline states, notably Egypt, Chad, Central Africa, Ethiopia, Eritrea, South Sudan, and Libya, have convened several meetings at the level of heads of states and ministers of foreign affairs. Meanwhile, the appointment of Ramtan Amamra, former Algerian foreign minister and head of the African Union's Peace and Security Commission, to serve as the personal envoy of the UN Secretary General for Sudan has been buoyed hopes that there will be new leadership to advance a unified, coherent international approach, according to analysts, and political commentators.
Animal resources are a major aspect of the Republic of Sudan's economy. The country has one of the largest livestock populations in Africa. Cattle, sheep, goats, and camels provide milk and meat for local consumption, and meat and live animals for export. Ruminants also provide ancillary functions including draft and transport, produce manure, and act as a store of wealth. The livestock sector plays a critical role in the Sudanese economy and the welfare of the whole population. There is no doubt that Sudan's vast multitude of domestic animals represent a large proportion of all African livestock. Based on FAO data, the country sits at the very top of the league table of African countries concerning its animal populations. The country ranks first to third among all African countries in the number of poultry and fifth in the number of donkeys. In 2009, Sudan's official sources estimated cattle numbers 42 million, sheep 52 million, goats 44 million, and camels 5 million. In addition to these, there were also 8 million donkeys and 784,000 horses. Cattle are used mainly as dairy animals in most Sudanese traditional production systems. The famous area of cattle in Sudan is Kanana, Gezira, Butana, and Bakara. In the eastern province available camels, Butana, the Kara, and other sides of Sudan. Pastoralists in Sudan rear large numbers of camels, cattle, sheep, and goats. The country exports large numbers of live animals, mainly sheep to Saudi Arabia and camels to Egypt. It also exports chilled and frozen meat, mainly to Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and Egypt. Livestock mobility is more effective as a result of cultural assets, such as customary institutions, for resource management, local knowledge, social spatial, and a culture of endurance. Livestock is a strategic element in livelihoods, income generation, food security, and in agricultural development. They contribute to the national economy and human welfare and livelihoods via, for principle, tillers, poverty alleviation, food security, environmental conservation, and gender equality.
Than the people in Sudan.
A top State Department official said on Tuesday that pressure from Congress on the United Arab Emirates over its alleged support to the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, in Sudan is helpful. The House Foreign Affairs Committee's Subcommittee for Africa held a hearing on U.S. policy options in the Sahel region that spans across the continent below the Sahara Desert. Much of the hearing focused on the ongoing conflict in Sudan.
Are the lives in Sudan less important by 20 times? And if not, how are we going to address that gap? Let me rephrase it. Are you receiving support from the administration as much to do your jobs as your colleagues are doing theirs?
Mr. Chairman, the situation in Sudan is commanding much time and attention from the administration. For example, we are seeking to help the civilians be in a position to take power when the conflict has abated. So that is why Ambassador Godfrey and the embassy that was previously located in Khartoum is now in Addis Ababa, where the preponderance of Sudanese civilians are meeting to support them in that effort. Ambassador Rubenstein is in Jeddah, working to try and...
Madam Assistant Secretary, that sounds great. You've been to Africa and spent a lot of years in Africa, and you understand that part of the reason why the Russian misinformation is working is because for a large population in Africa, they see it as true in their lived experience. They see it as true that America's not showing up. They see it as true that America doesn't care. And they see it as true that we're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine and they're getting pennies on the dollar. They see that America's commitment is not there to their plight. And so part of the reason why we're experiencing these issues in the backsliding democracy, governance, the economic and educational opportunities that we're able to participate in is because they see us as hypocrites. How are we changing that narrative through action?
Mr. Chairman, my contacts with the Sudanese people tell me that they believe that we are the best friend to the nation. It was the United States. We are perceived to be disinterested and care about the civilians and care about the stability of the state. That is not the position of other partners in the international community. The strength we have is that they want to have a partnership with us and they want our help to resolve the conflict.
Just before Thanksgiving, Kenya's President Ruto at the SAF and the SAF leader General Burham met in Nairobi and issued a joint statement which called out the Jeddah process for being too slow. Assistant Secretary Fee, how realistic is it to expect that Jeddah produces anything of value when one of our strongest partners in the region meets with a belligerent leader and calls for an alternative fora?
We work very closely with the Kenyan president. In fact, he has invited the United States to join an IGAD summit that will be held this coming weekend. I speak with him regularly. The secretary speaks with him regularly. We are working very closely with our partners in the East African Regional Organization of IGAD, of which he is a leading member, as well as with the African Union.
Is the UAE a friend or foe in ending this conflict diplomatically?
We share the concerns that Ranking Member Jacobs identified about UAE support to the RSF, and that is a topic of conversation, including most recently during the Vice President's visit to the UAE for COP.
What are some ways that we can hold the UAE, those actors in UAE who are fomenting this conflict, accountable?
I think the publicity of this hearing and your statement and request to the UAE to consider the detrimental impact of their support to the RSF would be very helpful.
Absolutely. In April, fighting broke out between the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF. The Wall Street Journal reported in August that the UAE is sending weapons to the RSF and its leader in an effort to protect its interests in the country, including access to agricultural products and its stake in a planned Red Sea port in the country. The UAE...
A 19-year-old abducted and raped by 4 men over 3 days. A 28-year-old women's rights activist seized from her doorstep and raped while being held for hours in an abandoned house. A 24-year-old raped by armed men in her home just a few feet from her mother.
They said, "We'll kill her if you don't give yourself to us." I sacrificed myself and said, "Whatever you want to do to me instead of killing my mother."
These are among 11 young women interviewed by Reuters who say they were sexually assaulted amid a war in Sudan by members of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces and allied Arab militiamen. They are all from the non-Arab Masalit ethnic group, which has been targeted in Sudan's West Darfur by the Arab-dominated RSF and its allies. At a refugee camp in neighbouring Chad, this 27-year-old medical assistant said she had been sheltering at a displacement camp in the West Darfur city El Geneina when men in RSF uniforms arrived and shot several Masalit men. They recognized her as the wife of a Masalit community activist and asked his whereabouts. She told them she didn't know.
One beat me while I was lying on the floor. They assaulted me and I kept screaming. While I was screaming, they stuffed a scarf in my mouth so I couldn't scream. After that, one held my arms. There were about 5 of them. Some were beating me. 3 were assaulting me. After the 3, I lost consciousness. I didn't know where I was, and I couldn't see or hear.
El Geneina was at the centre of a surge in ethnically targeted violence from late April, just after Sudan's conflict began, to mid-June. Survivors described civilians being slaughtered, picked off by snipers, mowed down by automatic weapons, and burned alive in their homes. In early November, the RSF and its allies waged another wave of attacks in the city. The women in this report were interviewed in the Chadian border town Adre in July and August. Reuters was unable to independently corroborate all the details of their accounts, but in many instances family members and friends confirmed elements of their stories. All 11 said the men who attacked them wore either RSF military uniforms or the robes and turbans commonly worn by Arab militiamen.
He threatened me with a weapon and told me, "Are you going to take off your clothes or not?"
This 25-year-old says she told her assailants she would rather die. Instead, they said they would kill her brothers.
At that point, I surrendered.
Nearly all of the women interviewed said they were raped by multiple men, and all said it was at gunpoint. 6 said their attackers mentioned their Masalit identity or used ethnic slurs for the Masalit and other darker-skinned non-Arabs. Emir Masa Asil, a tribal leader in El Geneina, has dismissed the rape allegations as empty lies. He leads one of the largest Arab tribes in West Darfur, a group from which many RSF leaders hail. Arab tribal traditions prohibit sexual assault and bar marrying Masalit. In a phone interview, Asil said if he couldn't bring himself to marry a Masalit woman, why would I take her by force? He also blamed the Masalit for starting the conflict. The RSF didn't respond to detailed questions for this report. It has said of the broader conflict in Sudan that it opposes any abuses against civilians. The sexual assault reports come amid war in Sudan between the army and the RSF. More than 10,000 people have been killed and 6 million displaced. The United Nations has said that across Sudan it has received credible reports of conflict-linked sexual violence involving more than 100 victims. But at the camp on Chad's border, survivors are having to live with the physical and emotional scars of their ordeal. This woman says she was taken to a room and raped by 2 men. She tries to be patient, she says, and not show her emotions, so people won't look at her as a victim and judge her behind her back. But under the surface, she says, she is very depressed. Sometimes, she adds, I feel like my life has ended.
Western Sudan has a great civilization and conservative community with distinguished culture and deep-rooted heritage besides unique customs and traditions. The indigenous people of Western Sudan are different Arab and African tribes like Bagram, Zagawa, Rizagat, Masalit, Hamar, and Fur. They speak local languages and Arabic dialects. Western Sudan has straddling regions with different climates and large lands containing huge resources, firstly waters and agricultural resources that include many crops, for instance, Arabic gum, sesame, peanut, and millet. Secondly, animal resources such as camels, cows, sheep, and goats. Thirdly, to the mining like gold and uranium. Western Sudan people are productive, both male and female. They work at agricultural fields and build houses that are made of mud and animal skins to construct monumental buildings to coincide with the natural climates in the region. Western Sudan is a rich district with diverse cultures, customs, and traditions. Also, they have unique dances besides rhythms like Nogara, Mardum, Waza. Also, they have inherited customary law in their community. They have Al-Hakama. She is a wise woman, calls for peaceful coexistence and defending for dignity. Alabama is a popular poet and the spokesperson for social and political circumstances through her passionate poetry, which is used to call for war and peace with influential words, and also plays a positive role in solving all complicated issues among the local community to fulfill peace and stability in the region. Western Sudan is represented as tourism attractive in Sudan. The most prominent components of tourism is Jebel Mara mountain, which considered beautiful places. It's about 10,000 feet above sea level with a Mediterranean climate and has a large plant diversity. There is a thick forests, permanent waterfalls, and Al Random National Park, which is characterized by an abundance of wild animals and birds besides the fantastic landscapes. Moreover, the Westerners are famous for learning and teaching Islamic studies, which represented in Kaloa. The people of Western Sudan in the past supported El Mahdi revolution, and they were known by spreading the Islamic call over the country. Ali Dinar Museum is one of the Turkish Islamic style. It is located in the city of El Fashir in Darfur. The building contains 2 copper drums that were used to announce war and weddings, the Sultan's clothes, Ali Dinar throne besides Islamic manuscripts. The Western Sudan people gather in one place called Dara to eat and drink with each other in a cooperative manner to reinforce communal cohesion, and they have famous meals like porridge, kawal, and ROP besides delicious beverages. Western Sudan is an important part of Sudan economically, strategically, culturally, above all humanly.